registered, so they must be on the live also and everywhere. So that's one of the couple. The other is that we also have got huge community of community radio stations who have joined in because of being the common community, and they also reach last mile. So those are a very strong thing. And just to let you know that how it has happened is through our partnership with AIBD, and we have been able to organize a lot of people to log in and share the information. And those of you who will come on day after tomorrow, there is a dedicated session on how community network and community radio work together. Our community is increasing of supporters. I mean, it started with DEF and Internet Society as an organizing, as a lead organization. It is supported regularly by A4AI, which is the Worldwide Foundation's body, APC, Association of Progressive Communication, APNIC Foundation, and if I am not forgetting, AIBD, of course, as I mentioned, and also Landscape of Hope, who work in the area of how culture, heritage, and art can be integrated into rights and digital rights. So a lot of organizations are here who are supporting and making it happen. Some of the other thing that can be shared by Rajneesh, and the reason I started is that then Rajneesh can take his intro into the session itself. So while all of you are here, both the session, these two sessions there are two sessions in the next 2 hours or less than 2 hours, 1 hour 45 minutes. So I would just say thank you very much, Reggie, for joining, Talent for joining, Satish from Facebook joining, Bhaishali from UNICEF for joining, Duncan from EPINIC for joining, Amrita from COAI, but now Amrita, I'm seeing more in the internet, governance sector playing huge role, APR, IGF, and so on and so forth. And she has been instrumental in setting up India's IGF as well. And then we have Daniel, and if I'm not forgetting anyone, all of you are here. Thank you very much. I will hand it over to Rajneesh to take it forward from here, and I am standing here.
Thanks, Osama, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever he may be joining us from. It's so wonderful to gather once again, albeit virtually again, unfortunately, but that's the sign of the times, I suppose. This is the 5th CNX APEC we're holding, and every year I think we've brought some new flavors to the event, and which is, I think, interesting in itself, isn't it? If you keep doing the same stale old thing over and over again, some people call it insanity as well, right? Doing the same thing over and over again. But so what we try and do, of course, is bring about some new interesting ideas and initiatives every year or every time we do this. And if you look at the history of CNX APEC on the website, you will see that every year it's done something a little bit different. And yet again, this year, even though we're doing this virtually, one thing we did really want to do was to bring in some new faces and voices into the conversation. So you will see that, we have some of our longtime supporters, but as well, we have a range of new people that we are trying to bring into the conversation. Because, if we keep talking about ourselves to ourselves, it's not very useful. So bringing in some new perspectives, I think, really does help. As well, over the years, Osama and I have been trying to do a bit of work with community radios and see how we can upskill them or train them up to become community internet network providers as well. So this year, I'm very happy that with our friends from AIBD, which is the Asia Pacific Institute for Broadcasting Development, which is a UN agency based out of Malaysia, they've very kindly partnered with us this year to bring their community with us. So some of them may be on this session, of course, but as well on day 2, on the 17th, we have a full session with our friends from AIBD and their community. So, there are so many synergies between community radio and community internet network operators, and we're trying to see if we can bridge that. However, that, of course, is for later. Today, I'd like to dive into the session. So as you all probably would have seen from the program schedule, we have a pretty tight agenda in how we try and do this. One reason is, these virtual meetings tend to become quite boring and monotonous. So we try and, change things up a little bit. So the basic outline of the session, that the first session that we'll have is, we'll start with some very brief introductory comments from our 4 panelists. Then we'll move into a very short discussion, just about around 30 minutes perhaps. After that, we'll have a video segment, which our team will put up. Just try to bring in voices who you don't normally hear from, of course, in these sort of events. So this is literally voices from the community who are dealing and living this every day. The changes that we all experts always talk about, but these are the people who are doing it out in the field. Then we'll come back to we'll come back to continue our panel discussion. And in case there are some questions and comments from audience or other speakers and panelists that we have, we'll try and respond to that. And then we'll finish this off and move on to the second session, which Osama will be moderating. So not wasting any further time, I have 4 great panelists lined up today. I mentioned that we're trying to bring some new voices into CNX APEC and this field of work. And I'm happy to say at least 2, maybe 3 of these 4 panelists are new to this, at least to this event. Obviously, they have been active in many other fora. So I have my new good friend. Over the last couple of months, we've been discussing quite a bit on a number of things. And, we hope to work more together in the future. Dr. Daniel Featherstone, who is a senior research fellow at the ARC Center of Excellence for Automated Decision Making in Society at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Australia. We have Bhai Shelley, who is a Communication for Development Specialist at UNICEF India. We have Amrita Chaudhary, who is the president of the Internet Society's Delhi chapter, but as well, she is the vice chair of the Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governors Forum, as well as active in a whole bunch of other fora. I sometimes wonder how Amrita finds time to do all these things, but she soldiers on. And last but not least, we have Satish Mittal, who is the head of Facebook Express Wi-Fi in India. Satish, maybe we should call it Meta now. I don't know. Maybe you can tell us when you speak. And so with these 4 panelists, what I'm hoping is that, we have, although the topic itself is, okay, so one of the reasons we chose this topic, which is the pandemic digital dependence and the unconnected challenges and opportunities, is really to set the stage for what's to come over the next 3 days of this event. It goes without saying that the pandemic has had major implications and a massive impact on how people go about their daily lives these days. And digital technologies, of course, from when the pandemic was declared globally, or even before it was declared, people were looking at the internet to see how we could support things. And true to form, of course, the internet has coped, it has scaled up, it's been able to do what it's done. However, there are vast swathes of the population which really haven't been able to benefit from this. A lot have struggled. And interestingly, it's not just an issue in developing and emerging countries. Even in developed countries, we've had the exact same issue where, people, depending on their economic class or where they may be located in a country, even a wealthy developed country, have suffered from issues. Then, of course, there are minority communities and First Nations peoples, and a whole bunch of people with disabilities is another stakeholder group which have raised concerns about, they seem to be being left behind. One of the reasons, of course, is that most governments and agencies around the world use digital technologies to try and deal with the pandemic itself, from infection management to control to your dosages to booking your appointments to get your vaccination and so on and so forth. Then, of course, there's the education perspectives. Kids at home, what do they do? Work from home. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. So I won't get into all that. I think we're all very well aware of all the issues that have surfaced. But what I would like to discuss with my panelists today is to see to hear from them with some very brief opening comments as to from where they sit and what they are involved in based on their background and the work they're doing, how have they seen things evolving? So I'll start off with Daniel, because I'm pretty sure it's going to bring in some very interesting perspectives from a wealthy, developed country. He and I share the same country, and we won the cricket T20 last night, so I think we're all very happy with that. I was going to wear an Australian jumper when I thought maybe I shouldn't. I wouldn't want to rub salt in the old enemy's wounds and all that. Anyway, Daniel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajneesh, and that's very generous to invite me to be part of this conversation. Thank you for that. I'll just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I live and work in Victoria, in Castlemaine. That's the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to First Nations people all across the world who are part of this conversation. My background is in filmmaking, and I worked in remote communities in the Nganadara lands of Western Australia between 2001 and 2010, managing a remote media organisation called Nganadara Media. And then during from 2010 to 20, I managed a peak body for remote First Nations media, and then a national peak body for First Nations media. So my interest here bridges both digital inclusion as well as the First Nations radio. So great to have both audiences involved. Last year, I did a project for ACAN, one of the consumer advocacy group in Australia, called the Remote Indigenous Communications Review, to look at infrastructure in remote communities across Australia, and found that while the infrastructure had increased, the divide was actually widening for a lot of remote First Nations people, largely because the rest of Australia was getting online increasingly faster with the rollout of NBN and a number of projects like the Mobile Black Spots program, which has increased the availability of services nationally. But really, during COVID, a lot of the remote communities were locked down, so people weren't able to come in and deliver the services. So there was an increasing need for online access to those services, and a lot of people were simply unable to access services, and that included even getting food and basic things like doing their banking, getting money out, accessing their welfare payments and so forth. So with up to 30% of people living in remote and very remote communities not having internet access and very few households having phones, people were basically being left out of getting good information during COVID and getting First Nation, getting those essential services. And in fact, the radio stations played a big part in getting information out. You may not be aware of it, but in Australia, we now have a new Closing the Gap target for First Nations people to have equity for digital inclusion by 2026. However, I would say that is a very ambitious target, and a lot of work has to be done in that space to improve the infrastructure, the affordability, with a lot of the big challenges around the cost of prepaid mobile, which is a primary way that people access their services, and basic rollout of training and digital skills. So I won't go into all the details right now, but that is a key driver for the need for improved data around this. So the project that I'm working on now, called Mapping the Digital Gap at RMIT University, is about trying to address the need for data in remote communities, and also more research is needed to look at the First Nations access nationally. There's been a widening gap over the last few years, and we believe that that's widened further, but there's a lack of data to really tell that story. But I'll come back to that later and hand back to you, Raj.
Thanks, Daniel. I have some questions for you for later, of course, including, you mentioned the digital inclusion issues that Australia has. And, I think we want to often we hear that the problems with inclusion and digital divide and all that are endemic to poorer countries or developing countries. But, I think we have proved that's not really the case. So we'll come back to that, hopefully. Okay, so from Australia, let me head up to India and bring in Bhai Shelly. India, of course, I think many of us saw the images on TV when the massive infection waves impacted India late last year. And of course, right now, India seems to be doing pretty well. But Bhai, perhaps you have some thoughts to share on how you have seen things evolve over the last year and a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. And I would thank Daniel also, because when he was narrating, I could relate very easily, because we have more or less similar situations in many parts of India, especially talking about Uttar Pradesh. So from development sector, because in UNICEF and Communication for Development, we engage with communities for various programs and with focus on maternal and child survival. So during the pandemic, needless to say that most of the service delivery or community engagement were affected. And, it didn't affect only those who were not connected. It affected both the connected as well as unconnected. So, and the other thing that we noted was that the playing field was not equal. So I will come back to this, because this is very important for any other pandemic in future. So, looking at different experiences of how people were affected, basically I find that there are 6-7 deprivations, and one is a skill set. So when you have option for registration for vaccination, you even if you have a smartphone, you need those skills to operate. So the first thing that we struggled with was a skill set. The second was accessibility, and especially talking in terms of the border areas, the areas, sometimes it becomes very difficult to, reach the villages even physically. And so you can understand the challenges for online digital communication. The third thing, affordability, because in many cases, we get to know some very interesting data also. For example, people switch from one mobile number to another mobile number because they don't want to continue, certain service because of affordability. And this is very rampant. It's not unusual. It has become a kind of routine. And then the socio-economic gender issues, and here the issue of agency becomes very important, because if we talk about women's access to information and life-saving messages, the agency played a big role. And so we could easily see that women who were federated into SHGs performed better than women in general. So that was a big learning. And then elderly population, physically disabled. I mean, these were people who were at the receiving end. Then, looking at in hindsight, I think the solution lies in connecting the dots. So you have conventional methods working at the ground. When you have this kind of pandemic situation, you experiment, with newer things like digital platforms, digital technology. And I think a good mix of these two provide way forward. For example, I will speak later on some of the examples, because we tried to amalgamate a couple of conventional and digital platforms, and the results were very good in terms of breaking the barriers of access, skills, and other barriers. So I stop here.
Thanks, Mike. Amrita, I'll go straight to you now. Just realize you're running a bit behind schedule now.
Thanks, Raj. I'll keep it brief. Most of the points have been shared. While we are connecting people, there is a lot of people being left behind. Not only those who have not been connected, but even amongst the connected people. For example, the low bandwidth. Most of these services are being digitized. But with the low bandwidth, people are not being able to access all the services. The payment delivery system, for example, gets delayed. There is a lag. And there are studies which actually I can share it in the slide. I don't want to waste time, which show that we are losing money on that. The gender divide definitely is increasing. People don't know how to use, these services. The other thing which, apart from what Shelley mentioned, was, there is a language issue. Most of India, for example, do not speak English. Now, the services, many of the government services are in the local language, say, for example, Hindi, but it is not completely in Hindi. When you get into the payments part or the others, it gets into English. And how safe it is, people don't know. The digital literacy part is extremely important, how to use it. How safe it is, how are you using it, are they getting meaningful access? Now, most governments today are talking about connecting everyone, and all governments across have a target, okay, by this year or that. But are we reviewing the strategies of connecting people is the question. Have we reviewed what we have done? How has it worked? Now, for example, Government of India has a fund called the NoFund Fund, which can go into connecting the last mile. Has it been effectively used? Are we also engaging communities into it? Like you have the community networks, they may be working and the people have been empowered to use it, or, you are engaging the community in it. Are we trying to replicate them? Is the government extending the support to replicate them? How are we, using the learnings which we have? Because, what worked yesterday will not work today. And we can't just go on like, this is what private sector has to do, this is what the community can do, and this is what the government have to do. And Raj, here I will also like to bring in something which you have been advocating, which is collaboration, cooperation and collaboration between people, and different stakeholders have to speak to each other. We need to see what lessons we learned. And another thing, if you look at, is that during the pandemic, the countries which had high technology and could adopt good technology for COVID measures, they did extremely well, whereas the countries who did not have that kind of expertise lagged. For example, Singapore did very well. Taiwan did very well in, managing it. India, to a certain extent, did. We do have concerns. We do have surveillance issues. But then there are many countries who could not use technology in that manner. So these divides are increasing. And if we don't learn from each other's, I would say, experiences, hits and failures, I don't think we will be able to go to whatever targets we want to go. And I think it's important to involve communities in the discourses. When we are trying to frame a technology, trying to frame a policy, no point asking later. If you do not ask what a person wants and you try to give it to him as per what you feel, there is going to be a gap. So that's about it.
So you said many things, Amrita, that really struck a chord with me. And of course, as you know very well, one of my biggest concerns in recent times has been the new digital divides we're creating in various ways and forms. So I won't get into that. But point well noted. Satish, my friend, what does Meta have to tell us?
Hi, everybody. First of all, in housekeeping, we are still trying to get used to Meta. And if I interchangeably used Facebook and Meta, so please consider that as one and the same. Honestly, a couple of months back when we met Osama, we really thought that we share some common interest in what DEF is trying to do in building communities and what Meta connectivity is trying to do. So let me give a global perspective first. We divide this problem into two. So one is connecting the unconnected. And to Amrita's point, we have connecting the underconnected. Underconnected as those where technically the connectivity is available, like places like India, you have 3G, 4G, but there are pockets where people don't have a great experience. She has given many examples, I'm not repeating that, but we know that, yes, there are communities who are deprived of a good experience, and hence during COVID specifically, the public schools, the students in the public schools, they were deprived of some good remote education, which otherwise was available for the have-nots and the haves. So that is what we do. In terms of how we are trying to solve this problem, we provide tech solutions which help manage the networks, grow the networks, and monetize the networks. And there are multiple solutions which obviously can't be covered within this call. I would really encourage any of you to really go to the LinkedIn profile of mine. We continue to share a lot of interesting ideas and the work which we do across the globe, specifically in the emerging markets. Closer home in India, we have done a lot of connectivity initiatives in the country. And then even places like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia. So a lot of work going on here to make sure that you have a better connectivity experience available and you are able to monetize these networks. So let me stop here. And I know we will talk on similar lines, maybe the rest of this session as well.
Thanks, Satish. So we were going to get into the discussion, but I've just been checking with Osama on what we've got lined up for the little video we're going to play. And I think it may actually be interesting if we play the video now. Osama, are we, or Jenny and team, are we able to play the video now before we start the discussion? Because I think that may also offer some perspectives.
Yes, we are playing the video right now. Yeah.
Okay, so
I would actually, Rajneesh, I would suggest, because it's in rhythm, continue the discussion, and in the break we show the video, because all of us are together.
Okay, fair enough. And I see Dr. Reg is here too. So yeah, all right, good. All right.
Yes.
All right, so we'll continue. So I apologize, slight change in agenda, or in schedule, I should say, and we'll come back to the video later. All right, so, so if I look back at what all the four panelists have said thus far, I think, they've pretty much given a very good overview of a whole bunch of issues. One thing that struck me was when Amrita was mentioning about replication, and the question I asked myself as I was listening to her: are we duplicating things or are we replicating things? I think very often we end up with duplication, not replication, right? And there's a very distinct difference between those two terms, right? And what you end up is people, having their own development agendas or whatever they may have. And they have to meet some KPIs, so they go and do things. And oftentimes it's just doing the same thing others have already done instead of coordinating and collaborating with others and having greater impact and greater reach. Okay, so I want to come back to Daniel now on from what he said earlier. And I think I've already mentioned a few times that we have some people find it strange that supposedly wealthy and developed countries are also facing issues. One of the things that I did ask him to ask Daniel to speak about was, how have minority communities, and in particular the First Nations communities, how they have dealt with the pandemic, and knowing that they've been using radio as well as the internet in dealing with it. More importantly, I think there's been lots of issues we've had in Australia with the schooling system as well, right? How the education system has coped. And Amrita, to your point earlier, yes, we have a fairly well-developed infrastructure in Australia, but I can tell you these schools suffered, they still are suffering. New South Wales, for instance, has been in lockdown. We just came out of lockdown a couple of weeks ago, but 4 months we were down, and schools were struggling, even with all the technology we have and supposedly all the wealth we have. The schools were struggling. It's not just having infrastructure, it's not just having the money available, but it's actually prioritizing how you're going to use that. What do you do with it, right? So all the money in the world is not going to solve a problem if you don't know how and where to spend it and what to prioritize in that manner. So, but I think I'd rather let Daniel speak. He's the expert on this and he's done a lot of work in this area. So Daniel?
Yeah, thank you, Raj. And just to put a little bit of context, so there's, the digital divide in remote communities is very hard to identify exactly how big that is, but the Australian Digital Inclusion Index is a national study, and what they've seen is that since 2018 to 20, the size for First Nations communities, the size of that gap has gone from 5.2 to 7.9. They're sort of percentage points. In remote communities, 2 studies were done that were, the gap was 17.3 in one community, and then the next year it was over 25. And so the gap is, close to 25 points, it's close to 20 points greater, simply because people don't have the access to services. There's very much a localized digital divide. Agencies might have services, but the households have no internet access at all. Things like NBN, Sky Muster, the satellite service, means that people might have access to a Wi-Fi. Some communities have mobile services, but it's often highly congested, and the affordability is the big issue. People share a phone and ended up, with very high expenses compared with the postpaid services. So in a lot of communities, the schooling, kids simply weren't able to do homeschooling. They just couldn't afford the data to be able to do homeschooling. We saw the result. The outcomes were that a lot of schools, they just gave up trying to get kids engaged. I was meant to be in a community this week doing some research in Wilcannia in New South Wales, which is an outer regional town. What they did in that community was they used the radio service to broadcast lessons over the radio, because that was the most reliable way of getting those services to kids in the community. They also were delivering packages of information door to door to each house, so the kids had their workbooks to work on. And they did some innovative stuff like creating songs that the kids sort of workshopped and were delivering over the radio, and feeding back through recordings that they could do at home. So it was a range of strategies, and really the First Nations radio services played a really important role through COVID in keeping people informed and knowing what was going on in terms of service availability, and what was happening in terms of health information and so forth. So while internet access was not available to most people, the radio services really stepped in and filled a big role, putting information in language and making sure that it was localized for the community, and giving local people the voice to share that information out. So, we saw that was a big part of it. In terms of other services, people like a lot of the shires that might have had Wi-Fi were turning that off because they didn't want people getting congesting around or congregating around communal areas. So they were turning off services that might have been the only way that people could access internet. And so that was, again, really increased the divide during that period. And so there have been some solutions put in. NBN put in about 54 communities in isolation, Wi-Fi hotspots into communities. Communities have put in their own services to try and address this, their own local Wi-Fi networks. There's been some small cell mobile coverage gone into some places, and Telstra have provided free public phone use. But on the whole, the issues of the pandemic haven't been, have really drawn attention. We've had a lot of national coverage around the needs of remote communities that have really come out through the pandemic. Does that answer your question, Raj? Or is there more to it?
It does, and I know one of the reasons I really wanted you in this session today, Daniel, was, again, to give people a real perspective from a country like Australia, that that we have also faced challenges, right? And our kids and others have also suffered through this. And, obviously the implications for the future, particularly when it comes to school kids, right? I mean, I think we'll have a whole generation of kids who might not turn out to be able to use their full potential, right, due to these lags that we've had. Anyway, but perhaps that's a discussion for another day. So Bhai, from what Daniel said earlier, you said, things resonated from when he spoke the first time around. And I think, again, what he's just said, again, that must have resonated with you as well in the work that you've done. Of course, the development sector has for long used media as a forms of outreach and advocacy. But perhaps you could, also touching upon what Daniel just said, and some of your own observations in the work you do, but as well, perhaps you could also suggest a little bit on what role traditional media can play, and where does digital media fit into this? Since we all seem to be going digital now.
Thanks, Raj. Actually, this is excellent because we have been grappling with all the channels during last 1.5 years. At the outset, I would say that traditional media that we know in development sector, for example, the interpersonal communication or group communication and different kinds of media and television, radio, community radio, they are very, very important. They cannot be replaced, because they ensure participatory communication. They ensure ownership, the community leadership, etc., etc. So they cannot be replaced. Now we need to complement, and that's what we noted and we learned, that the newer technology that we used during the pandemic, for example, the telecounseling, the videos, SMS, and community radio, the newer things that we did with them, they all proved very positive, because perhaps in our pre-pandemic period, we were not using this mix very efficiently, because there was too much dependence on conventional face-to-face methods. So I'll give you one example. In Uttar Pradesh, as you are aware, like many other states, we face the problem of malnutrition and the challenge of severely acute malnourished children. And, there is no magic bullet. We just need to engage with the family very frequently, efficiently, with all the skills of interpersonal communication. And that we were doing before pandemic also, but we introduced the telecounseling, videos, SMS, and then we started training the Anganwadi workers on using these, newer digital products. And that proved a kind of magical way forward, because now we are tracking the changes in food and feeding practices also, and we are finding very positive results. So, I would like to conclude by saying that we had a very bad time during pandemic, but not so bad in terms of our learnings. We have learned a lot, and perhaps we are better resilient for any next bad pandemic. And in terms of development sector and communication platforms, the great learning is to create hybrid models and engage with community in a more efficient way. I hope this clarifies.
No, absolutely. And it occurs to me, Osama, maybe later we need to do another session specifically on just the points that Daniel and Bhai have said thus far. I think it would make for a very interesting conversation. So we may come back to both of you, not this week, and that sometime later. I think there's things we could explore here as well. Amrita, so you very nicely outlined earlier some of the challenges that I think we've all faced in various ways and forms. But it's also interesting to know that, of course, governments have also been struggling how to deal with the pandemic. Some governments still are, interestingly enough, a year and a half down, nearly 2 years down the track. But there have also been some challenges in how we've been using these digital technologies, right? A lot of people have raised various concerns. Some concerns, you could say, are structural in a manner of speaking. For example, earlier we spoke about the digital literacy skills, the skill sets that are missing, not having the access, the data caps, or the cost of access and all that. But beyond that, there's also some other challenges that exist with these digital technologies, right? Do you want to see how we could maybe offer some thoughts on how we could balance those, or is everything okay?
Raj, that's a tricky question. There is no 0-1. It's a gray area, but yes, one thing we need to appreciate is governments are also trying to learn and do things right. Whether they're doing right or not, that is a different question. But I think what is important, and many times new technologies are brought in, but we don't, and it is brought in for a good purpose. However, at times it is infringing the, the privacy or the, an individual's rights. So those are concerning. How I see it is, while connecting the unconnected is a first priority, we need to use innovative methods to connect people, promote the community-led initiatives, as in we need to replicate good things or add on to good things, not start something just because we want to start something. That's one part. Second is, whenever a policy or a technology is is thought to be deployed, there has to be some communication with the different stakeholders as to how it works. Is it going to help a user in the way someone is thinking it is supposed to help? What are the risks involved? For example, if I am adopting a particular technology, how is the redressal mechanism going to work? What are the checks and balances? Is privacy built in by design? Are we also looking at things which have worked earlier and try to adopt them? Those are certain questions, not only while deployment of technology, but also while formulating a policy which needs to be done. And I think here, one thing, and just because I'm associated with Internet Society, it's not because of that I'm talking. Very recently, as I said, first of all, are the rights of people being respected and protected? Is privacy by design being maintained? What are the checks and balances of is it a surveillance? Can it be misused as a surveillance tool? These are important. And similarly, Internet Society has launched the Internet Way of Networking Toolkit, which actually has parameters to see that whether, the particular, I would say, regulation is promoting an open, interoperable, secure, and trustworthy internet. So this is, the parameters on which the particular policy or technology is being designed could actually be mapped to see that if it is, fulfilling those things. It's not a mandatory thing, but regulators can use it as a checklist to see, okay, am I promoting an open internet? Am I promoting a trustworthy thing? And then they can tweak it. As in, these are tools which are being made. I'm sure many more can be made. But as an example, as in, governments need to look at these checklists or toolkits and see and weigh where the proposed policies fall. I think that would help to a considerable extent. And I think you have to involve people. Just some people sitting in a closed door making a policy is not going to work. Simple thing. We have something called for the vaccination, we have a particular CoWIN app, which is good, which is great. It is working excellently. But, I'll use a personal example. I had my father's vaccination done, both the vaccinations, but somewhere they made a mistake of recording the second vaccination as a first. Until today, I have not been able to resolve the second vaccination issue. It's showing 2 vaccinations, first vaccination. Now, how am I going to get that resolved? I have not been able to do, and I'm sure there are many more people who do not know. So if those open conversations don't happen, and if you don't know whom you need to reach out for it, and I've tried all methods, I have failed in the last 3 months. So those are issues which come up. And I'll sum it up here, Raj.
Thanks, Amrita. Satish, I think we've always said that Asia is mobile first, and India in particular, I think, is a great example of that. Just the mobile penetration rates that we've had, and even the rates, supposedly one of the cheapest, or if not the cheapest in the world. However, there's still vast differences in the quality of connectivity that people get, and then obviously what they can afford as well. Wi-Fi has been used recently in many ways and forms. I mean, community networks are one example, but so is sitting in your coffee shop or sitting at the airport and using Wi-Fi and so on. And we also see telcos, for example, in urban centers using Wi-Fi for handoff so that they can remove congestion from their mobile towers. But we still, with all these things happening, we've heard from Daniel and Bhai and Amrita as well. We've all touched upon the fact there's still vast areas where people just don't have the connectivity they need, right? So what do we need to do here? I mean, how do we scale this further, particularly in rural locations, particularly people who might not necessarily have the digital literacy to use this? So I think there's probably multiple parts to the problem, right? And I'm sure Matt is working on some of these with the project that you are heading up. So I thought you perhaps could give us some perspectives there.
Sure. I think first of all, let's acknowledge that there is a great work has been done in the connectivity. You talked about India. India moved from an unconnected country to an underconnected country at the best. In a very short span of time, we are 4G covered everywhere. So it's a great story. But at the same time, it's good to acknowledge that the remaining unconnected problem is not that easy to solve. And we do see 4 big dimensions to it. One is the availability of the network itself. Second is the affordability of the network. India had been fortunate to get some of the price points of data price points, which are the cheapest in the world. Third one is device availability. Even if there is a network available and you can buy the rental, but are there smart devices in the hands of the people who want to use it? It came out very clearly during COVID that there are many students who wanted to do online classes, but they didn't have a device to render. So that is the third dimension. And fourth one, Amita touched about it, is the relevance. That India is, it is a mobile first country to a great extent right now as we speak, but English is still not the first language in this country. And if the internet continues to stay only at the English language, we need to solve that problem of relevance as well. That why should people really go online? Good part, again, is not only just the 4G penetration in the country, there are a lot of digital technologies which have been adopted and people are seeing the benefit of it. UPI is one of them. Look at the billions of transactions which are now happening on fintech, and it is happening at the grassroots level. The next door fruit vegetable shop is actually accepting UPI. You can pay through mobile connectivity. So that's great examples. The work to be done further and where Meta is working on, let me just deep dive a bit on that. 3 things. One, how do we make these networks cost effective? And for that, we are working on moving from monolithic network structures to disaggregated network structures. We have a great program called TIP, where we bring the suppliers, the demand and the supply side together and disaggregate this to bring the cost of network down. Second one is monetization capabilities, fully realizing that there is no single silver bullet and every country behaves differently. What works for India does not work in Indonesia. And hence, we create multiple monetization capabilities and let the service provider choose whichever works and more relevant in that space. And the third one, again, it was touched by, I think, the multiple speakers today, that we need not to work in isolation. Can we think of build once and utilize it multiple times, right? Do we really need to have fiber being laid by MNOs and telcos differently than the fiber being laid by the ISPs? Yeah, so we are working towards that society where can we build the network once and use it multiple times. You talked about, let's say, Wi-Fi is built once. Can you do the data offload on it? Can you do monetization on the same Wi-Fi? Can you do some IoT services on the same Wi-Fi? So the same service, same system once built can be used multiple times. So these are the 3 things which at least Meta Connectivity is working on across the globe and specifically in India as we deep dive into it.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button yet. Thanks, Satish. No, indeed, you made some excellent points there, and also again, a lot of things are striking me today. And again, it strikes me that we all seem to be speaking pretty much to the same things, right? But yet, when you go out into the field, you go out into the real world, people don't still seem to be acting upon these learnings or these best practices, if you will, right? So I think there still is a gap that exists out there. And it's not necessarily the private sector or civil society or NGOs or government. I mean, it seems to be an endemic issue to everyone, right? I mean, we have these great conversations, but then when we move into the day-to-day operations and getting stuff done, I think we get very perhaps tunnel vision. Okay, we need to do this, and not really thinking back to say, okay, how can we actually coordinate with others or collaborate with others? And sometimes there are obviously structural issues in themselves. Sometimes the collaboration is not that easy, right? Depending on who you are and what you're doing. So, but fair enough. So some very great comments there, Satish, as well. So I think we've had great comments from all the speakers thus far. What I wanted to do next was to see Jenny and Sheil if there are any questions from our audience, and if you could please read them out for me if they are. Whilst we wait for you to tell us those, I also wanted to open up the floor to the panelists in case you wanted to comment on what the other panelists have said. So Daniel, Bhai, Amrita, and Satish, from what you've had each other say, is there something you wanted to perhaps add to what others have said? Amrita, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Raj, I would like to comment on what you just mentioned. I think each of the different stakeholders, like be it private or government or even civil society, have to come out from, when negotiating with the others, you have to come out from your mindset, try to understand the other person's perspective also, and then come to a neutral something which works for both. It cannot be that my way or highway. And that happens at most conversations, that I am right, the other person is wrong. I think we need to be sensitive about the other's issue and try to see if we can be able to address it to some extent. It's not a magic wand, it will not solve anything, but perhaps, trying to come to a middle path may help to some extent.
Point well taken. Bhai, and then Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. Actually, I was listening about the cooperation, collaboration thing. And in UNICEF, we work very closely with the government. And, that looks like a strength also, because government brings in that scale, reach, and, it becomes easier to deliver things. So maybe because we are also discussing about, reluctance to try new things in digital platforms, or the internal bureaucracy, internal things within the government, perhaps this kind of conversation we should take to, the government counterparts more and more. And I can easily suggest that we can have this kind of conversation, if everything goes well, offline, maybe in December or January, so that the new plans which government is making for next year, it can be more digitally useful.
Absolutely. No, we'll follow up on that for sure. Daniel.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learnt in Australia from the models that you've been putting forward with the community networks model. I think in Australia, we've sort of relied on the federal government to provide all of our communications policy, and the major telecommunications providers to be delivering the services for remote communities. That simply isn't meeting the needs, and we need much more of a community-driven approach. And we've just had an Indigenous digital inclusion plan discussion paper. Everyone's put in their own ideas. So there's a real push for this to be driven by communities, and our own project, Mapping the Digital Gap, we're looking at developing community-driven digital inclusion plans so they can identify what the barriers are and come up with their own local solutions. So, it's a really good learning from all the work that you are all doing in Australia.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Thank you. Sheil, I think I saw you put your hand up. Do you have some questions or anything from the audience?
Yes, I think a couple of people have got their question. They are raising their hands. So I think we can unmute them and they will ask questions to the panelists.
Okay, so we maybe 2 or 3, right? I see that we're running slightly behind schedule now. So can you get them to speak? Yeah.
Yes, sure.
In the meanwhile, can I show something interesting? You all are being seen in the field. As you can see, people are watching all of you. So Daniel, you would imagine, had you ever imagined Indian village would be looking at you and, your photograph in the, and Amrita laughing, and then Raj and everyone. So this is a great feedback, that's already, interesting is that, and all those are community network operated audience who are sitting there in the community center.
So Sheil, do we have someone?
Yeah, Sheil, if you're finding it difficult for them to connect, maybe you can post on their behalf. One question I had with the audience is that I was reading the newspaper about a few days back that Elon Musk has announced that he's going to connect few 100 million people in rural India through satellite, almost without lag time, extremely low lag time, which won't even bother to the users. How are we? One side is that we're very happy somebody would be actually connecting, but I don't know. I was a little intrigued that when Satish was especially saying the responsibility of connecting the unconnected, then connecting the underconnected, then connecting the, I would add, connecting the super connected, who are always facing misinformation, So I don't know if people have any reaction vis-a-vis community networks or role of community-driven networks or community-driven internet.
So with what Musk is doing, I think you need to put that into perspective. What he's offering is using his LEO satellites, low latency connections, right? But you still need to have the ground station, which costs money. It's not free. You still need to have the devices, and multiple speakers have said that it's not just having the connection, it's the devices that you have to use it, the digital literacy skills. So there's multiple layers to the problem, right? One thing I'm hoping, I don't have full details yet. I know in Australia, they've also launched that. In fact, they reached out to me to see if I wanted to try it out because I happen to be in an area where they can provide service. So in Australia, they can't provide the service everywhere, right? There are red zones which they can't provide connectivity to, but other parts of the country they can. But the point still is, what it could be very useful for is if they allow their LEO connections to be used for backhauls. There are parts all over Asia, well, let's start with India, but in many places around the region, where the backhaul problem would be significantly solved, right? We always have these backhaul issues. But whether they'll be happy to provide connectivity to a village of 100 people or 200 people or whatever it may be, because there is also questions there, how much data that would flow through that. So I think there's more questions to be answered yet, but I do believe it's a promising development. I see Amrita and Daniel with hands up. Please just speak. Don't wait for me to bring you in.
Thanks, Raj. As in, it's great if people are connected, but and we have to have various ways in which to connect people. And as Osama and Raj, you mentioned, it's just not the connectivity. A community-driven initiative is they are teaching everything, starting from how to use, what to use, capacity building, helping each other. Now, just giving an internet to someone is not going to help people in remote areas who have literally no understanding of how to, English, forget it, even how to use devices in a particular manner. So great if we get the connectivity, but we also need help. Assisted services are required, and that is where the community networks or others come. And I think it is going to be more of an overhaul kind of a thing, wherein there has to be a last mile. If we can do it, great. But India, Osama, looking at India's population, we need more. The less, whatever we are doing, we need to have more. It's great if that happens, but we need also more. And the Indian story and Indian connectivity is quite different from the rest of the world. We have our own ways and jugars of doing things.
Daniel, do you want to go?
Look, I totally agree with Amrita, and I'm just wanting to say that it will make a significant difference in Australia, where our only sort of our major satellite solution is the National Broadband Network, which is 36,000 kilometres up. This is 500 kilometres, so there's a significant difference in latency, but everyone has to be able to put up their own satellite dish, and it's a much more expensive service in Australia than the current National Broadband Network. So we're a long way off addressing the affordability issue, and a big part of the challenge is around data. We need to work out how to aggregate data, whereas Starlink is very much an individualised service to each household. We need to be able to share data costs collectively.
Okay, Sheila, did we have any questions? I see time is up and I think we need to close the session now.
We have a question from Sabani, which is, what is the road ahead for setting up cooperatives for enabling connectivity to the remote rural areas? If one of you could answer that. And we have another question from Mikhala Jagdish, that they are still, I think she's typing from a village and she's saying that they're still in the 3G world. And as a consumer and a community, what can they do to speed up the process, or what can we all collectively do to speed up the process? These are two questions we received.
I will repeat the question. The first question was, Sarbani's question was related to setting up cooperative for running community radio or any community-oriented initiative. Is that a possibility? How do we do it? And the second was more that we are still in village and you still get 3G, but we are suffering from broadband and many transactional activity cannot be done. Especially that shows the dependence on digital at the time of pandemic and the bandwidth not available enough. How do we get it?
So would any of the panelists like to respond to that?
Yeah, let me make an attempt on that. I think there is one thing which did not get discussed today is this new development called PM Wani. That is a great attempt by the government to reduce the red tapeism, remove the bureaucracy as much as possible, and they call it democratizing the Wi-Fi. And that's a great step. Maybe it can have a congruence of what the communities would like to start and cooperatives would like to start working towards, including the NGOs and other people may like to participate in this initiative. We do see that that's a great step by the government coming forward and saying, hey guys, you can set up Wi-Fi hotspots any place specific to India. Maybe the audience outside may not be able to appreciate what has been done here, but India has completely liberalized the way a Wi-Fi hotspot can be set up in the country. And that is one great opportunity for the communities to really work on. I would just take a pause there. There is enough information around available on how does PM1 work. But if anybody wants to know even more, happy to provide those. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Satish. Any others would like to comment on the two questions? So, so let me just add here to what Satish has said. A lot of the times, things are available, but people just don't know where to go to find the information or what steps to take, right? So I think that in itself is a gap, isn't it? There are so many programs from government agencies, from development organizations, even the private sector. But oftentimes, people just don't know where to go to start the process of. So I think that is as important to focus on as is providing the opportunities in the first place. Okay, so I think we need to close the session. It's been... yes, Jenny.
We have one more question, a follow-up question from Sabani.
Okay.
Should I read it out?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So this is regarding the funding for last mile connectivity. Why are we not asking for internet for development in the Gram Panchayat development plan? And she's suggesting that would be a great initiative. So if any of you could comment on that.
Would any of our Indian speakers like to respond to that?
So I guess this boils down to the question, the suggestion which I was saying, that when policies are being decided, we need to have Sarbani, people like you or others who are working, giving these suggestions that who needs to be included. And that's where the conversations has to happen at a regular basis. And I'm sure it can still be given, whether it will be taken, used or not, I do not know, but I think that's where the conversations have to happen.
Okay. Right. So what I'll do, I'll just ask my speakers if they have any final comments, something we could tweet out, so not a very long speech. If there's anything you want to add before I end this session. Satish, anything from you?
No, I think just the last point of the participant, I think, again, many people don't know that SIDBI, which is a banking institute in the country, they have launched very soft loans to launch PM money hotspots. So in a way, there is a lot of initiative by the government itself to create that ecosystem. So feel free to tap into that. There is a very simple process. It's available on their website, and it is collateralized by the DOT itself. So great initiatives by the government for you to really start setting up some of these hotspots and connectivity programs.
Thanks, Bhai, yes, anything from you?
Just wanted to say that in last 10-15 years, if you look at community radio stations, it started small, but the way civil society organizations and advocates pushed it, it has become a big reality. And I think similar approach is required for a movement for internet connectivity for everyone. So I think a great opportunity. And as we are meeting here, I think we need to continue the conversation. We need to push it further.
Yeah, Amrita?
Engage, innovate, collaborate, and review.
Thank you. Daniel?
So, yeah, we've obviously got a localized digital divide in many of our communities now, and I think that requires local solutions. And I'm hearing some fantastic solutions from all of your communities. I think this dialogue is really important to keep going forward for developing countries as much as for the developed countries.
Thanks very much, and thank you to all of you. I think this has been a far. We were a bit concerned on how the session would turn out because it was sort of a bit broad in nature in many ways, but I think we've been able to bring it to where I thought, where I would have liked it to be. So thank you very much for your contributions. Two things, that I just want to mention. Many years ago, when I used to do a lot of work in the development sector, one of the things I kept on saying was that, please use appropriate technology as an appropriate solution. And I think that lesson still hasn't been learned in nearly 2 decades now. You have these fancy consultants who turn up, probably for development funded program, and they're whacking things that they're familiar with as opposed to engaging the community and seeing what the community's needs are. And this is where I think community networks themselves, the key word in community networks is community, right? So it's what the community needs, and you also do it together with them, right? So the work that Osama and I have been doing for the last 12 years now in South Asia, we've always started by engaging the community first. If we don't have a community champion, we don't proceed with the work. It's as simple as that. Because without that community buy-in, without that leadership within the community, because all of us will head off after we've done the work, right? But it's a community that is left with what they have. And if you look at a lot of the development programs of the past, people parachuted in, they've set up some great stuff, and then they left. And oftentimes, particularly in developing and emerging countries, those things fell over because there was just no continuity after that. So I think there is a need for keeping the community's needs in mind, involving the community, and as well using appropriate technology to achieve what our collective aims are. So thank you all very much for this. It's been a great session. I'm going to end with some more cricket speak. So I always thought of myself as a very lousy cricketer, but for some reason I was always made the opening batsman. So I'll leave you to think why they used to put me there. But what I think I've had today is my 3 opening batsmen and my batswoman, who I think have put on a stellar innings for the rest of the conference week. So I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. And we look forward to keeping engaged and furthering the conversation, not just the conversation, but I think trying to take some action on these things and pushing in a couple of ways that we can. So with that, Jenny and Sheel, can we play that video now perhaps, and then we'll go on to the next session.
And I would request all of you to, like a team player, be around while others will be playing the next session.
No drinks break. Jenny, are we good with the video?
Yes. Give me 15 seconds.
All right. All right.
There is no sound, so you can enable the sound.
Somehow the video never works properly.
You will have to redo that for sound. Enable sound.
We're trying to fix it. Some problem. The video has. Give us 30 seconds.
Okay. You know, with all the digital tools and means we have.
Maybe you can share the link.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. And may I have our next panel show their faces so that I know that we are pretty much together. Oh, wonderful. So how do I show as, yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Amita. Thank you, Talent. And Reggie, is Reggie around? I can't see Reggie. Okay, so thank you very much. The second session was supposed to be more focusing on the subject, like pandemic affected, how it has affected especially the health sector as well as the education sector. But I am sure you can share other than this sector as well if you want. And there are three perspectives that I would really like you to highlight is that, we passed through the pandemic and access to food and access to life was the first priority, and it took away all the limelight of the problem that we were facing. There is no doubt about it. But as soon as that we came over that, suddenly the whole focus was do we have a regular access to health advices or not? And do we have access to education or not? Considering that we, most of you speakers are from the Asian country, Asia also has most unconnected, and we also have a large population of students and adolescents and kids who were totally deprived by education. And of course, in your different aspects, you must have seen many. I would like to start with Talant, who works on the ground in Kyrgyzstan. And I had a fortune to go there. I was fortunate to go there and had seen the locations where he was planning to start. And so it's not only an example of great deployment, but also maybe Talant in the last 1 year, what has been your experience that you can share to inspire, number one, connectivity, number two, the need and necessity, and number three, that there is no alternative. Earlier, we used to have alternative, we used to have non-digital, also we used to have a normal life, but now without digital, it's becoming difficult. So Talant, we will start with you.
Thank you very much, Osama. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks so much for having me in this panel, and personal thanks to Osama for coming to Kyrgyzstan and inspiring us to do community networks. And since then, we have launched in Kyrgyzstan a couple of community networks. After the pandemic, the lockdown eased a little bit. Just recently, we decided to visit other villages that are unconnected to learn what's the situation. But of course, in the meantime, we've been working to help kids in rural areas to get education during the lockdowns. So just to give you like an illustration of what is the situation in Kyrgyzstan, which is a landlocked mountainous country, you could see in my background is like the mountain passes through which you have to go to reach many of these locations. Some of them are located very high in the mountains, and in the winter when the snow falls, they really become unreachable. So for example, we visited one village named Kızıloy. And in the past, when we came to villages and said we would like to connect your village to the internet, people would have little interest because they didn't really understand what it was. But this time, when we came to Kızıloy, the whole community gathered, the teachers, the parents, the village elders, everybody was saying that we need internet because our kids are missing education. So for 1.5 years, because there was no internet, children really had no opportunity to study. And the teachers say that they had to sometimes break the rules and go to the homes of the children and stay outside and explain to kids what was the lesson. And some of the teachers would say that because we don't have materials, we have to go to nearby place where there is internet, 25 kilometers, and download whatever information we have, bring it to the school and share, not school, but to the village and share with the kids. We spoke to one of the girls, 11th grade Khadija, what she does to study during the pandemic. And she says, on TV, when there are lessons happening, she records them on her smartphone. Although there is no internet, she has to record it because she has siblings and everybody needs to share the TV. So I asked, what happens when your memory gets filled out? Well, I have to delete my personal videos, photos to be able to record the lessons. And she says, I don't regret deleting my personal videos because lessons are really important to me. So this was really kind of for us emotional situations sometimes. Another village that we visited is called Engilchek. It's a very remote area. To get there, you have to pass through 4,000-meter passes, and it's near the 7,000-meter peaks. And there, because no internet was available during the pandemic, some of the kids had to move to their relatives' places in other towns to be able to access education. And speaking about health situation, the village doctor was saying that when his granddaughter was having 40 degrees kind of temperature, he did not know what to do because the path through which they have to go, there is no internet, so he doesn't know if it's open or not. He said, if I get stuck in this area because of the snowstorm, I am risking my grandchild's life, my life. So he stayed. Unfortunately, his granddaughter the situation improved, but he says this is the situation we have to deal with because there is no connectivity, no telephone, sometimes no radio, no TV. One interesting story I wanted to share about the village where we connected to internet called Zardali. Has no television, has no radio, no electricity, but they listen to one radio station which is very critical. It's a part of the Radio Free Liberty Network. So we thought they are actually fortunate that they miss this all brainwashing from TV and they only listen to this very critically minded radio station. So it's I think interesting from the sociological standpoint. So what are the challenges that I think people are facing in terms of connectivity, in terms of education? I don't want to list all of them, but I want to kind of list a couple which we thought very interesting. One challenge we found in terms of content, of course, there is very little content in Kyrgyz language. So we thought we would digitize textbooks and make them available through our Internet in a Box and online. What we found out that these textbooks are copyright protected by the authors and the Ministry of Education, which pays for these books, doesn't have the copyright. So, and there are multiple authors that own the copyright. So we were risking a lot of challenges later on with lawsuits. So we said to the Ministry of Education, why don't you, because you pay for these books, get the copyright? And they say, well, we don't want because we cannot be responsible for the possible errors in the books. And then we don't have kind of the possibility of upgrading these books. So it's better if it stays with the kind of authors. But for us to be able to share this information online with kids in rural communities, that became very big issue. Another interesting challenge we found out was it's not really about money. When we visited local village council, they say, we have the money, but we don't know how to use it to be able to connect to the internet. We asked the government, we asked the Ministry of Digital Development, and their cost estimates are outrageous, like, hundreds of thousands of dollars to connect a village of 100 residents. But when we speak to local residents, they say there are different options. There are, for example, old TV towers that are sitting that maybe we could use. There are light poles that we could probably put the cables through. So the local residents have the knowledge, and if there is little additional help to them in terms of technology, in terms of know-how, I think it would cost not hundreds of thousands, maybe $10,000, maybe less. So this village of Zardali, we connected for $5,000 grant. So my last, I guess, section in this intervention, and I'll be able to provide more details in the Q&A section maybe. What are the possible solutions in terms of providing education? So during the pandemic, we used this Internet in a Box, which we called Ilim Box or Knowledge in a Box, to which we brought to all the unconnected villages across the country. Another thing what we are doing is providing digital skills trainings for students and for teachers. We are kind of helping teachers master new skills to be able to deliver education through kind of new methods, almost using TikToks and social media and channels that children actually use. Another solution that we have very big hopes for, and we have colleagues here by Shelley from UNICEF, is this GIGA initiative that would connect all the schools around the globe to the internet. So when we were speaking to village residents, we would say, UNICEF is doing this initiative, and we would like to try to bring the attention of this GIGA to such locations as yours, which could be like an experiment. If we connect a village like Engilchek or Zardali, which sits on top of the mountains, very far away, then it could be like a case study for the rest of the globe when GIGA does this in other areas.
Thanks, Talant. Can we come back because we have many rounds and we have time as well.
So
Okay.
maybe we can come back to more points from you. Duncan, I'm seeing that your screen coming and going. Is there a connectivity problem?
Hi, Osama. A little bit, but hopefully it's working. I think I'm frozen, but if you can hear me okay, I'm ready and willing to participate.
Okay, wonderful. So we would like to have listen to you for this session, especially coming from Epinic Foundation, where you have a 36,000 view of many of such initiatives that takes place across the region and many places. What would you like to share from the perspective that how digital necessity is pushing the need of community networks, especially from the perspective of need for the community to connect for health needs or the education needs and so on and so forth?
Thanks very much, Osama. And again, my apologies to everyone if I get frozen in frame. Shout out to Raj. Great to see a few familiar faces here. I'm new to this event, as Raj, I think, mentioned when he started, but I'm really very pleased to be invited to join you. Apologies for my colleague Sylvia Cadena, who I think you all know, has always been very actively involved in this community. I think Sylvia's in the audience somewhere, but she's got a lot on today, so I'm going to talk a little bit. Look, you're right, Osama. The view we've got is from the APNIC perspective. So right across the whole region, the 56 economies that APNIC serves with its members as the Internet Registry. I'm assuming that everyone on the call knows APNIC, so I won't go into too much there. I think from what I'd like to talk about today is just bring a slightly different perspective. And it is very much linked to some activities that the Foundation's starting to be involved in. But it very much builds on what we've done, particularly what the ISIF Asia Grants Program has been done. For those of you who know ISIF, it's the grants program that APNIC has run for the last 14 years now. It's now fully with the Foundation after starting out with APNIC. Sylvia obviously leading the way with ISIF. And for those of you who know ISIF, it's always been focused on three sort of key thematic areas: inclusion, infrastructure, knowledge. And if you've seen the ISIF grants this year, they've been really substantially ramped up across all three of those sectors. And it's been a really great period of growth for the grants program, building on all the work that they've done and supporting a lot of the ideas and strategies that we're starting to talk about today. So everything I'm going to talk about now is really building on that track record of ISIF and the grants that have been supported through the program over the years with all sorts of different partners and collaborators in this area, in this space. The thing I wanted to highlight, though, was the growing sort of portfolio the Foundation has around research and education networks. I'm sure everyone on the call knows research and education works, particularly their role as the backbone for university and educational institutions. And we see two things happening with RNE and NRENs, if you like, National Research and Education Networks, as a result of COVID. One, of course, is just like the schools that we've been talking about, the real challenge for universities to continue to provide education for their students and have the platforms ready that will allow the students to continue their education in a virtual COVID-impacted environment. Obviously, universities are no different from schools in facing those challenges. Some universities are, of course, slightly better set up because they've been operating with remote students for much longer. But for those universities who don't operate like that, it's been a very challenging time to do that, which in some ways brings to a sort of increasingly what I think is a positive impact, if you like, of the last 2 years. I hate to use that word positive because it has been so challenging and difficult and very tough for everyone involved at the last 2 years. But it's really allowed some of the partners, some of the big partners that we engage with, to focus on the importance of education and really highlight the need for investment, and provided such a compelling case to invest in education and connectivity around education. You know, I don't think any donor out there would step away from a conversation around the importance of connectivity in education now, because they've seen it firsthand. And that's a really positive step. And I really highlight research and education networks, and NRENS is a great example, not just in the area of education, but in the area of research. And everybody's seen in every country the importance of being able to conduct research, whether it's on the impact of COVID, whether it's on treatments for COVID, whether it's on providing up-to-date and reliable research information on COVID. Everybody has realised just how important the role of universities and the research communities are, and particularly their ability to collaborate outside their campuses and across the country on different aspects of it. And so we're really looking to increase investment. We have a new partner, for those of you who know it, the Asia Pacific Internet Development Trust, APIDT. I'll put a few links in the chat after I finish speaking so people can go and have a look at that. The Trust is supporting work that we're doing with KO University around a fairly established program called Soy Asia and AIII. This is a connectivity project teamed up with Soy Asia is a sort of curriculum, how we use the connectivity once we get the connectivity. It's been going for a couple of decades now, looking at satellite connectivity for Southeast Asian universities. But now they're moving into the area of what we've been talking about, particularly low Earth orbit options that we could, and how feasible are they for universities. They're also looking at cable connectivity, so backbone fiber connectivity coming into the region, and how we can make that available to universities. And interestingly, and this is my last comment to wrap this up, they have, particularly the Soy Asia project, and the thinking that increasingly we're having is, this is not connectivity for the universities in the big cities. This is connectivity for second cities, provincial universities, colleges away from the big population centres that are well served. And they're thinking increasingly around a role, not just in education, but for example, backup in times of disaster, and working much more with the community where the institution sits in. Disaster is just one example of the role that these campus networks, if you like, can play for the community outside of the university or the technical college campus. We find this a really interesting and exciting option to look at. I think we all know there's a lot of established organisations. Obviously in India already you've got your own NKN building. Same across a lot of regions, there's renewed interest in this. So that's the particular point I wanted to bring into this discussion. Thanks very much, Osama.
Thank you, Duncan. I think very, very important, because, you know, whenever we talk about any alternative networks, technology, and all those things, it was very heartening to know that you shared a lot of information. Where is fund available, money available, possibility available, support available, and in that direction. And I am also, you know, delighted to share with you I'm just bringing in from one of the other discussion, is that we must work on creating a regional fund for purely last mile connectivity for development, using community networks, not in its activism mode, but more from the proliferation mode, you know, which the communities can sustain themselves. And that is where earlier Sir Bunny's question was very important, is that if there is a possibility of creating federation, cooperatives, local bodies, because I'm sure I'm going to ask Meeta, and sure, is that connectivity just for education is a separate topic altogether. You know, you cannot just have internet, think that the internet has reached, that means education would reach, and the way it should reach and the way it should be consumed. So Meeta, please enlighten us, because you write all over the world and you give advices in the area of access to education. And I also know that you are not a great propagator of
the industrialization of education, but at the same time, you want education to reach everyone and people should be on their own. So how do you see this necessitating, necessitizing the need of internet and digital for education? And it seems like we have no alternative, but we have no thumb rule, and we have no ethics that we have developed for this.
No, so thank you so much for inviting me, Osama, and thank you so much for such a wonderful question. And even before I dive into the question of education, I think I want to also talk about the digital divide. And the digital divide that we are talking about in education is not a single homogeneous unit. The digital divide is multiple realities that coexist. For somebody, the digital divide is just having absolutely no signal till you go to the next village and climb up on top of a tree. For somebody, the digital divide is saying that I can see across the road that that rich person has a mobile phone and a computer with fantastic connectivity and they're playing games on it, but I have access to nothing. There are multiple realities that coexist. So we are not solving for one problem. We are solving for 6, 8, 10 separate problems, and we will have to be we will have to create solutions that simultaneously work on all of these problems. So the problem starts from the most basic one of accessibility to affordability, but the one that is most critical and showed up in the pandemic, and I must say to the shame of the education sector, because for 20 years, we have had the ICT for development movements, we have had the ICT for education movements. We have been trying very hard to talk to schools and say, please incorporate digital into the way you do your work. Now, 20 years ago, if we had started the work, because we did have initial technology, it wasn't as good as it was today, but we had some technologies, we had some access. If schools had adopted it en masse, come the pandemic, we would not have been so lost. You're absolutely right. What were we doing as soon as the pandemic struck? All of us came up to help, and all of us started digital training for our teachers wherever we could. That's what, 5% of the population really? The numbers say 30% in India, but 32% isn't the real number. 32% is the best case scenario. We started digital training. What was that digital training saying? Okay, this is how you log on to Teams. This is how you log on. That is not digital education training. That is technical training. But digital education is a whole other game. Digital education is about communicating in digital space. You spoke of TikTok videos. Now that's digital communication. Look at YouTubers who teach young people how to do makeup. Or this is how you prepare for university, this is what my room looks like. And compare that to the utterly boring videos that are put out by the state. There is no communication happening. There are no pedagogies that are actually being implemented or adapted for the digital space. Because the digital space is rendering, at this point, is rendering in 2D. In two-dimensional mode, you cannot have emotions communicated. You do not have peer-to-peer communication that is happening. You will, in fact, you don't have it visible to you as a teacher. As a student, you are just a little box over there. Now, there is good news there as well. Because as a little box, you are not a front bencher or a back bencher. As a little box, you are all equal boxes. So we've had a whole churn happening in the digital pedagogy space. And that has resulted in quite a few wonderful things. Teachers who were so unhappy and dissatisfied with the outcome, they turned around and said, we've got to fix this. Tons of micro innovations, tons of adaptation. People who kept on saying, no, we don't want internet, please, no mobile phones in our schools, suddenly began to include it. Students who were told to go away from screens were now told to sit on screens, a complete turnaround. And finally, we have an opportunity to say this is a part of the formal system. But what are we doing with this opportunity? We are saying that just because we can create access and affordability, we have created engagement. We have not. We will be able to create engagement only when we are able to get the students to use the multivariate channels. The fact that on the internet you can interrupt, the fact that you can have peer-to-peer conversations, the fact that you can have Socratic conversations even across villages. When that ability, when the agency goes back to the student using the internet, when the decentralization results in every student being the center of the conversation, and when this becomes a truly democratic medium where knowledge is prime and the application of knowledge is prime, not the process of saying, I am the teacher, therefore I'm sitting on a pedestal, therefore I get the screen, therefore I get the controls to mute you or no, that is not going to be the reality for tomorrow. The reality for tomorrow is going to be either your students are totally engaged and totally enthused about learning, and we have this opportunity with the digital tools at our disposal. And yes, there are these multiple realities that I spoke about earlier. But while the rich are experimenting with digital pedagogies, it is up to governments and institutions like all of us gathered over here to fix the infrastructure part. So digital pedagogies are one important part of what needs to be fixed. I have a lot more to add to this because Osama, you also wanted to speak specifically about radio. And I would not want us to assume that all forms of education actually work out as well as each other, because radio again is a whole different pedagogy as compared to, say, the internet. But that again is a very, it's a different conversation. And I think we should actually be working on those conversations and those enablements as well.
Yeah, thank you, Meeta. That is the day after tomorrow, when we will be talking about community radio and the role of radio and how they can become a community network. But what I gathered from you is that there are two things that you highlighted. One is, of course, the lack of connectivity, but the point is lack of contextual connectivity utilization in the education sector from the perspective of making a meaning out of it. And I'm also reading between the lines, and I'm not attributing totally to you, but what I am thinking is that might as well, if the connectivity hasn't reached, it should not reach in a way that we don't know how to handle it and how to use it. In the meanwhile, we should be ready. We have already lost 2 decades in terms of never being able to figure out how to use digital technology or digital tool or digital media or digital communication infrastructure for education. It's the time when we are building those infrastructure, we must be knowing how to do it. So when we take community network to the people, we must take education in a box with a perspective, in a context, not with just saying that, okay, just because you have the bandwidth and you are on video, that doesn't mean we'll gather all the education in your life or all the wisdom in your life. Thank you very much for that. And I will come back to you again, few more things that I need to understand, especially when you are writing your book. We would like your book to highlight some of the community issues that we are grappling with. And I will go back, and this time I will request all of you to be precise in about 3 minutes each, so that we, because it's already 12:15, so that we have a question and answer session. But before I do that, I think I was looking for Reggie. Reggie somehow has dropped out. The reason why I will take 2 minutes to share what Reggie would have shared if he was there, because Reggie is running an organization called Tribal Health Institute for the last 30 years in a place in a Tamil Nadu hill, and it's all tribal area called Sittilingi. And early last year or year before last, when the first pandemic happened, between the first and the second wave, I got a call from him that we are not having connectivity, and we are in a place where we are surrounded by hills, and we don't have connectivity. And he runs a tribal hospital. He himself is a doctor, and that's the reason why he must have vanished, because he must have been called to the operation theater. So he and his wife shifted from one corner of the country to this place and serving the tribal community by building a whole hospital with several bedded,
all providing to only and only tribal population. And we went there and created an internet network for the entire community, their craft center, their hospital, their homes, their farmer center, and so on and so forth. And it was a fascinating story because they said that how COVID pushed them inside and they were unable to earn money because they couldn't sell their products that their craft community makes, or many of the supplies that they do who the farmers make, and they have to sell it. And these are the same people who had started 20 years back experiencing internet when they used to travel 150 kilometers in a car with laptop and desktop and go to one place under a tree, sit there, work for 2 hours, and then come back, and then again go every week. So that's the story I wanted to share. I mean, I wanted him to share. There is a film I would request Jenny to share on the chat on them that we have made that you all can see. But so these kind of effort, what I feel is that no connectivity, whether it's Elon Musk who comes with the connectivity or telcos is spread all over, there will always be difficult areas for people like us to bother about. There will always be a situation, exactly like the roads. There will always be a part on earth that will not have road. There will always be a part of population that will not have internet connectivity. And that is the reason why it is very important that we always look at contextually how community networks goes to the people who are the most remote and deprived and marginalized and unconnected. I will go back to Talon to complete what he was saying last couple of points that when he was narrating his side of story. And why your story is very important is because when you started, you were working as a consultant, and now you have created a whole organization called Internet Society of Kyrgyzstan and trying to handle this last mile connectivity problem. So everything that you experiment is going to be valid and relevant to all the Central Asia's remote areas, and not only that, India has got many parts like Central Asia, as well as we have many parts like Middle East, and we have many parts like the beaches, and so we have all kind of learning to come from all of you. So Talon, please complete your story, and then I'll go to Duncan to have some of his words, and then Meeta. Thanks.
Thanks, Osama. I only had a couple of points to finish. I think what I wanted to mention that once we bring the internet connectivity, develop the content, we provide the digital skills, and now we are working on the next level of kind of education access is Ilimbox 2.0. It's an online educational portal. I will share the link in the chat. And what we're trying to do is exactly as Meeta explained, that the educational materials that are provided in the traditional format, we are reworking them into more interactive and more engaging ways for students and the teachers to use in classroom or at home. And finally, I wanted to conclude my remarks on a light note that when we visited these areas, we thought that one day, hopefully soon, we will bring internet connectivity to these places. But what we really enjoyed was this digital detox. So our team was, kind of discussing and sharing stories with each other. And immediately after we left the villages and internet connectivity reappeared, everybody was back on their smartphones. So sometimes going to these places to have a digital detox is a really good experience as well. So thank you, Sama.
Yeah, I know, but the good thing about, digital detox is obviously for those who are hyper-connected. But I think when we take the connectivity to the marginalized and poor areas and the remote areas, I have usually seen is that their usage is absolutely for the purpose. It's not related to getting addicted to social media or something like that. That's a good news, but of course, when you are hyper connected, you are going to suffer many things. So Duncan, how do you think that your intervention can graduate to creating more national, regional cooperatives, funding opportunities, funding cohorts, available for sustainable running of last mile internet connectivity with contextualization. And I'm not even saying, because I'm not trying to put a pressure on you or on ourselves to become last mile telcos, but basically because without connectivity, things are not going to be normal anymore, because it is like getting excluded.
Thank you for saving me such an easy question, Osama. But I think it's you know, I want to, I want to emphasize what I see from my perspective as a time that we all know is altered, changed so much. Our context has changed so much. The importance of connectivity and education, as we're talking about in this session, connectivity for education and for health, has never been more compelling as it is now. We really are living in an extraordinary new era in terms of the compelling case we have to present to people. I was in a conference call a few weeks ago for the Soy project. They were talking about low Earth orbit satellites and how they could be available for, as I was saying, universities in the rural areas and in economies in Southeast Asia. And one of the participants said, look, it would be wonderful to get a low Earth orbit transponder into our campus, but we have to get a license from it. And the government just doesn't think the same way about the internet as it did when it first arrived and said, oh, 20 years ago, the internet's a wonderful thing. Yes, of course, you can have a license and connect. Now, licensing around and regulatory regimes around things like low Earth orbit satellites, you just don't know. Our governments may be suspicious of them, not trust them, be very careful in how they license them. That's the challenge. But at the same time, governments are faced with this need to provide connectivity for education. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to provide the education they need for their students and their children to develop. So while there are some challenges, I'm really looking forward to presenting these very compelling examples. And this has been a great session. Talon, I really appreciate the examples that you gave. Some wonderful ammunition, if you like, to use in these arguments and discussions we're going to have ahead with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Meeta, you need to tell us that, connectivity has reached to many who can afford, who can speak in English, who have money, who have access to education and all that. There are people who never had access to education the way we thought that they would have. And this whole population who were going to school, and the whole population which is unconnected from the school and unconnected from the internet. How do you see that, what kind of digital design we should have for them, which we can take onus of and build into our community networks or the last mile connectivity?
So one thing is very, very clear, that this is a public good. So what we do need to do is make sure that we build the case. The design has to start at both ends, the government end for the funding and for the support and for the current networks that exist, and definitely from the grassroots and from the community. I think, so during the pandemic, what we saw is that governments responded reasonably promptly given the nature of the crisis. I mean, especially as Delta was hitting India, within about 20 days, the Madhya Pradesh government had a radio set of radio programs out. Within about 45 days, there was an internet program out. You had platforms that were available. So those movements have already existed. So I'm talking first about the elements that need to go into the design. We need to make sure that all the micro innovations and all the government work that has been done is gathered, collated, analyzed, so that we are able to get the best of those and actually work on the basis of evidence. What worked and what did not work for different contexts. The good news for us is almost all the answers are already out there. Some fantastic work has happened. The radical part of this is that we will have to break the mold. So when we talk about design, this is not a simple incremental improvement that we are talking about. Thank you very much for talking about the book that I'm writing. No pressure on me here at all. but this is exactly what I'm trying to say over here, that we are bang in the middle of an actual evolution. There is, even for the rich, we have realized that in the hybrid world, in the blended world, a 40-minute class makes no sense. A teacher droning on for 40 minutes, talking and having a one-way communication with students is just not going to create learning. Have smaller bites, have things that are interactive, have students talking, discussing in forums, make it alive, make it real, make it alive. So the design elements over here must break the traditional mold. That we need a hub, we still need teachers, but we do not need classrooms. We do not need to put students in boxes anymore. We have realized that we will be able to create integrated learning even without the traditional boxes. Those traditional boxes were created for what reason? Just because you could administer things better before technology arrived. But now that you have technology, does it matter where any of us is sitting right now for us to have a meaningful interaction? It does not. You can have multi-location, multi-time, asynchronous, synchronous, the elements. And I actually want to list 8 or 16 elements. There's a framework that I can share with everybody later, which is not public yet. But these elements are actual choices that students, that systems can make in their design. And it needs to look nothing like the previous school. So these look like complicated choices, but these are basically saying that it's okay if a part of your lesson is delivered on WhatsApp and a part of it is delivered under a tree and a part of it is delivered online and a part of it is delivered at the tea shop where everybody gathers around. And all of these can combine to create a cohesive, rigorous, structured learning system with an excellent learner experience, with all the standards and that you would need. So let's retain standards and drop the processes. It's a reinvention that I'm calling for.
I have a question for you. Don't you think that there should be a separate design by the Ministry of Education or those kind of bodies to only concentrate how they can connect to the education centers or the schools? I mean, only working on bringing broadband to the schools or the connectivity to the schools. Do you think that's a worthwhile effort or initiative or a push?
Absolutely. This is essential infrastructure. It is basic and essential infrastructure. This is the road that they must build, because if they don't build the road, what are we going to ride our chariot on? The road is their responsibility, and broadband infrastructure, fast infrastructure, internet is absolutely something that is essential for every student. Otherwise, there is no way we are going to work towards equity. And the entire trouble right now is that we do not have equity in education. We are not able to provide equal opportunities to all of our students. Our students must have the same doors and windows across the world. And that door and that window is opened using broadband. So this is something that this access to the rest of the world has to be equitable. And as I said, this definitely becomes a public good. This is something that has to be provided by the government.
Thanks, Mita. Duncan, I wanted to ask you a question, is that, A4AI, I was on their advisory and we developed meaningful connectivity, framework and things like that. I see that meaningful connectivity very much is about, you should be able to do your job, as simple as that. You should get enough good connectivity, good bandwidth, good device, those good software, whatever application, so that you can do your job. Considering that, we have to bring meaning to the connectivity, do you think going forward, we will be working more on, funding or the resources for connectivity for education, connectivity for health, connectivity for livelihood, connectivity for, saving lives, connectivity for whatever. I mean, the community suffers, Now, what do you suggest, and do you think that you have some of those examples in any case?
Yeah, I mean, meaningful connectivity, I agree completely, Osama, with your initial definition, but what happens if you're a doctor, for example, doing surgery, your connectivity requirements potentially, particularly if you're in a developing economy where you want to go live to an expert in another economy to advise you on the surgery, is completely different to the connectivity needs of, say, a lawyer, for example, because you want to live stream video in real time, for example. So in my mind, the definition of meaningful connectivity for professions and workers is I don't want to say it's a journey. I don't want to say it's an endless journey, but it's a journey that we will continue on, because doctors doing surgery in real time with other doctors is just one example of a profession that would require a great deal of connectivity. They can have the good connectivity in a health centre provincially, but already we have a project, we finished a project last year in Papua New Guinea, and in talking to the lecturers at the universities there who were doing medicine, they were linking live to lecturers at the top universities in Australia to do procedures and learn about that. And they had a small taste of it, and they saw the potential and how it engaged the students, and thought, that's what we want. And so when the Coral Sea cable came from Australia, there was a big discussion on to give that capacity on that cable to the universities in Papua New Guinea that unfortunately I don't think prospered very well, because they didn't have a compelling case. And so meaningful connectivity, really important that we keep moving down that road and think about it in terms of the professions and what they need. And I haven't even started to talk about the needs of teachers in schools as well, as Mita was talking about.
Osama, can I just add one thing? Because
please go ahead.
Duncan just reminded me of this amazing story that I heard. So I just wanted to mention that. So there was this wonderful school in Phagwara, a private school that was considered a very good school. And the principal realized after about 10 days of the pandemic that she and her students were able to create and access learning, because she had amazing teachers, she had fantastic pedagogies. She just was running an excellent school. But she realized that the villages around were not being able to access learning because the government teacher response was very, very slow, because meaningful connectivity did not exist at that level, at the village level. What she did then was literally open out, instead of having passwords to log on to her the classes that she was running for her students, she simply made it open access for everybody. So anybody who could borrow a device, anybody who could sit in as a family group, even during the worst of the lockdown, was able to access quality learning just because she was able to open it up. So the fact that there wasn't meaningful connectivity, and yet with functional connectivity, you were able to at least provide a modicum of learning because you were able to open out your heart and open out your processes and move to open access processes, completely transformed the learning in that district during the worst of our times. Just wanted to share that story. I mean, she's inspirational.
Interesting. And, on a very interesting point, the AI, the artificial intelligence, which is transcribing what we are saying, transcribed your Phagwara story as Florida story.
Ha! Now that's a skill.
So pretty much like contextualization, even AI is required. AI understands Duncan better than us.
I don't think that's true. Thank you.
Well, it is. I mean, I could have used my English accent here, and I could have used American accent here, which is what I do when I dictate to my iPad. But I think the issue that you raise, of course, Osama, is huge, and I don't know if we have the time to go into it, which is about the ethics of AI in the education space. That's a massive issue.
Another level. Talent, in your area, how are you enabling with your connectivity? I mean, you said about a lot about education, how you are delivering education or connecting to education. Is there any example of health?
Are you asking me?
No, talent.
I think with health, what we found out is with the vaccines, the situation is very bad. People are, although there is no connectivity, people are still prone to fake news and misinformation that only teachers were vaccinated in the villages that we visited. And because they were, of course, more knowledgeable and because they would not be allowed to teach if they didn't have a vaccine. So that's the situation we observed. And one point that I wanted to mention here is need for flexibility in terms of policy and regulation, be it in the field of spectrum management, but also in the field of education. For example, the villages that we visited are very isolated, very small, and people just went about their business. Just it was before the COVID. However, the school was shut down and really teachers and students interacted, but outside of the school walls. But I think maybe if the Ministry of Education was more agile, kind of allowing these kind of locations to be more flexible, I think that would really help children. Otherwise, missing a year and a half of schooling for these remote communities was really disastrous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are left with hardly 9 minutes. Sheil and Jenny, if there is any question, please let us know on the chat box. By the time you do that, I just wanted to share two stories of both related to education and health. One in which UNICEF has been involved, and Bhaishali is still there, is that we have been using last mile connectivity to do three things very effectively. One is that how the people who have got connectivity where we can facilitate connectivity can video chat or video consult with the doctors. Because nobody wanted to go to the remote area, hospitals were not working properly in remote areas, health centers were non-functional, doctors were afraid to go to meet the community, and so on and so forth. I'm not even talking about a disastrous situation of the wave 2, but I'm talking about even in general that they don't want to reach out, and then there is a difficulty in reaching out to the people. So that was one very good example that we experienced, and we realized that for health, the meaningful connectivity is that if you can do a live video chat with the doctors, then it is a possibility that many of the preventive health issues can be tackled. And that's not less, because more than 80% of health issues are preventive and not really curative. For curative, you can always you need to go to hospital and so on and so forth. The second was in education. We realized that you cannot provide 320 million children a smartphone or machines when they are out of school in the time of lockdown. So, which is impossible, it's simply impossible. So even 10, 20 years down the line, it will be impossible. But what is possible is that, can you create a community-based access system? Like the way education, a school is a community-based access to education, because you can't create so many household teachers. That's why you bring people, students, to one place where you can have tutors, you can have your guide and mentors and so on and so forth. So why can't we have digital ecosystem also of access point where children can come, they can access, they can talk to their teacher, they can access several online resources and so on and so forth. And if you have a mechanism to test them out, they do. So we are setting up 500 such access points beside having more than 1,000 already existing. We started converting all of them to have an access point for online education or access to education. So one thing is community-based access point without bandwidth limitation and the infrastructure limitation is a very good possibility to keep the community intact and also keep the digital penetrated, because it will also give you a very good safeguard. It's something like you cannot watch something unwatchable in a community, so that's the kind of thing that we experienced. And another thing we experienced is that if we work with community radio at the last mile together with connectivity, then you can fight misinformation very effectively, because radios are still believed as a media that is trusted. Social media is not trusted. Social media has converted into a spreading false information, hatred, and all those things, and it has its own narrative. So these are the three things that I wanted to share. But let's close our session by looking at whether we have some questions to reply. Who will pay for the bandwidth, Osama? So Sarbani's question is, and all of you can answer, I don't have to. I will reply only after all of you. So Sarbani is asking that, if we provide connectivity at the last mile for all these things, how do we take care of its cost? Talent, you can start.
Maybe I can start, yes. This was exactly the question we asked in the villages where we went, like if we connect the village to the internet, how will it be sustainable? And in these villages, the local authorities said that, we will allocate money in our budgets. We do have the money to pay for schools connectivity, because now the authorities realize that this is a very important issue. And one more point I wanted to reiterate here, just to repeat, is the GIGA initiative by UNICEF is also exploring this issue of, if we connect all these schools to the internet globally, how it would be continued once the schools are connected. So it's still, of course, an open question.
Meeta, do you have any point, or Duncan?
I'd actually like to add an illustration, because obviously the logical answer is that the government and the taxes should pay for this, which is what I've said before. There is a very strong philanthropy and a CSR component to this, and CSR has been doing, in fact, of all the CSR spend in the world, education and this part of it has actually got the largest share, which is still not good enough. From the CSR story point of view, it's a big story saying in CSR we have done so much. From the education point of view, it's a drop in the ocean. There is just too much to do. But I think we have a case over here for a technical solution that comes from the private sector. And this is something that was done in London very many years ago. What they did is they created a centralized platform, which is almost like Uberization, but this was about a decade before, or at least 4 or 5 years before Uber came in, where the excess bandwidth of all the shops on the high street was used to provide free internet to anybody who was passing through. So there is a single login. I want some free internet. I log into that single central platform. If I'm passing by the Starbucks, it connects to the Starbucks. If I'm passing by the Pret a Manger, it connects to that. As I'm walking down the street, all the excess capacity of all of these stores down the street contribute to the platform, and I get a seamless experience. I think finding that excess capacity in the private sector and creating a cooperative around it is also a possible technical solution in the interim, as a medium-term solution.
Duncan, do you have any point?
Oh, I think I really, just to agree with Meeta, I think one of the things really we have to convince governments and about the use of the taxpayer dollars is there is no difference in providing connectivity to a school than having a government fund for textbooks. That's been an established principle for decades. Governments buy textbooks for schools. The connectivity is no different. It needs to be embedded into the government thinking that there is no difference there. But also, as Meeta says, innovation. I think there's some very innovative and creative ideas out there that we need to look at to support that as well.
That's a very, very good point. I'm going to take this forward to put pressure that if you can fund textbook, you might as well fund connectivity. If you fund for the food for the children, which we call in India as midday meals, then you might as well fund connectivity as well. If you fund for the cleanliness of the school or the playground for the school, then might as well fund internet as well, because that's a new playground, that's a new content supply system, and so on and so forth. So that's a very good way of saying, and I can see that, because when everybody asks us, like we have developed, Duncan, you have seen for the last 10-12 years we have been talking about community networks, and we have established about 200 plus. And when people ask how do you get fund for so I say, no, we don't get fund for establishing 200 plus or 300 plus community networks, not at all. We have just converted the need of the internet to all the funders as a necessity, So if you are putting an infrastructure for, let's say, for my communication system, for buying a food, for travel, for this, you are also going to fund internet access. In some area, internet access is cheaper. In some area, it's higher, and therefore the cost is higher or lower. And we use that connectivity to create a small little network where we might also apply for some funding, but we don't need full funding or a grant for creating community networks or last mile connectivity. And to much more specifically reply to Sarbani's question, I would say that community should also pay, because community need to pay for connectivity as well. You cannot say that you cannot pay for access to education through the internet. I mean, you should be able to pay. Of course, you may deny to pay for the infrastructure, but you must pay as a fees. Yes, Duncan, please.
Well, there was one other example I forgot that I mentioned. It was in a very interesting discussion talking about philanthropists who, as many of us know, many philanthropists, they love to build schools. And the argument was put to the philanthropists, don't build a school, build a community network, because that is conceptually the same idea, a place of education. And so don't think about building a physical structure that needs to be maintained, needs to be subsidized. Think about build a community network in the same way as you think about a school building, which I found as another interesting example.
Wonderful, great. So Raj, can you come back and we can just wrap it up so that we all are together in this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I just wanted to submit that we have successfully concluded session 2 without killing each other, without shouting at each other, without really making it a nasty TV debate, and yet we had lovely stories to share from different parts of the world. And I think from diversity also, we have somebody logged in from London, somebody logged in Australia, somebody logged in from Kyrgyzstan, but logged in from Istanbul, so not bad. We are very, very multifaceted session we had here. So thank you very much all the panel and for the great contribution. Raj, any concluding point before we hop into the day after tomorrow?
So I think both sessions have been quite interesting. If you recall, at the beginning of the first session, one of the things I said was that we really wanted to bring some new thoughts, ideas, and perspectives to these discussions. These discussions are not new, right? I think many of us are involved in various fora where we talk to these things, perhaps from slightly different perspectives or focus areas, be it education or health or connectivity or development finance or whatever it may be. But we do tend to talk about the same things. The problem I see with these conversations are most of them happen in silos, right? It's one set of practitioners and communities which talk with each other, what I call us talking to ourselves. I mean, if you've seen me talk at conferences, I say this very often. because we always end up talking to ourselves about ourselves. It doesn't make sense to me. So that's why we need to have that diversity in even the people we engage with. Sometimes it may not be a direct link as to why this person should be part of this discussion, but you will always end up with a far richer discussion as a result, right? That's what I've experienced. And particularly now with all the challenges that the pandemic has faced us, has put upon us. But, as well, let's not just blame the pandemic, right? A lot of the issues we are facing today because of the pandemic are actually structural issues which have existed for decades, right? Be it our teachers not being skilled enough to, I put a comment in the chat earlier, and what I said before, Australia, for instance, we've put a lot of money into infrastructure, even in our digital infrastructure in our schools. But our teachers have not been upskilled to have the confidence to deliver those lessons digitally, right? And I think Meeta posted on Twitter just earlier, one of her comments were reposted about, we've been doing ICTs for 20 odd years and trying to get schools and universities to do the same, but they just haven't taken it up as a priority, right? I think a lot of times, and there was a comment about ministries and governments not prioritizing it holistically. The reason in most cases is because ICTs have always been seen as a bolt-on, right? It's this new thing that we need to do. Another thing I say very often, particularly in multilateral meetings where I'm speaking in, is that we need a whole of government approach. It's not the ICT ministry's problem. It's the whole of government's problem to bring in digital connectivity. On the one hand, your finance and your treasury is saying we need to move to a digital economy. You can't do that unless until every sector has completely plugged into that and they're able to derive the benefits thereof. So, that approach has to change. Some countries, I think, are moving down that path. Some economies are, some are not. I think there's still a lot of old school thinking that exists. So there's still a lot of work to be done. I know we're sort of veering off into a bigger picture discussion now, but it does flow down to this issue of, why we facing some of these problems we do at the rural level or the village level or the little school in the middle of nowhere level, right? And even what I think Duncan was saying before, just the whole idea of what is it we do when we build schools, when we fund schools. If someone's got a stack of cash that they want to throw into building a school, maybe they need to be made aware of the fact that, the connectivity part is as important as putting up 4 walls and a roof and the foundation that the building is built on, right? So I think there's some great learnings in, and I'm hoping that the rapporteur's report or the conference report we have out of this, we can tease out some of these very specific points and then take them into other discussions in our other communities of practice where we can say, look, there is a linkage between these and there is something we can do about it instead of talking about the same thing over and over again. So with that, thanks very much, and back to you, Sam.
Thank you very much. This is the time we must thank everyone, especially the team and the people who are not fully visible. For example, Jolly is sitting, making us see live all over the world. Thank you very much, Jolly. I'm sure it's a very odd time for you and you still every year you enable it. Thank you, Meeta. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Talon. And thank you, DF team, Sheel and Jenny and Pranita, Abner, every one of you, and Sarbani. A special thanks to you for always making our discussion enriching. So thank you very much. And just to be very, very formal, DEF, ISOC, APNIC, F4AI, APC, Landscape of Hope, and AIBD. Thank you very much for supporting this. If you get time, please log in day after tomorrow again at this point of time when we have another 2 hours of discussion on how community radio and community network synergize with each other, learn from each other, work with each other, and make proliferated the concept of community networks connecting the last mile. Thank you very much. See you day after tomorrow, and then again on 23rd. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
about 3 or 4 years ago, it came to one of the major villages near us, about 10 kilometers. One was 10 kilometers, one was 20 kilometers. So, which meant that we could actually carry our laptops there. So we would carry our laptops, and we had there was a favorite tree of ours which we used to sit. So the thing is that by that time our organization had expanded, and farming had started, the school had started. So all of them needed the email or to check the network to send out something. So we would have a jeep, and everyone would jump into the jeep with their laptops, 5 or 6 of us, and then go off to this village, sit under a tree, finish off all our emails, I think this thing and all, and then come back, downloading, checking whatever it is, and then coming back. Now when COVID happened, an entirely different thing happened, because now, especially for the farming unit and the craft unit, sales were by internet, which means that now people are all the time inquiring or ordering or things like that, and then they need immediate replies, because the moment you don't reply for a day, they think you're a fraud. So when COVID happened, it was all the more urgent that we get an internet connection.
वहाँ पर हम लोगों ने कोऑर्डिनेट लेकर के एक प्लान बनाया कि कहाँ से कैसे कनेक्ट किया जाएगा, कितनी ऊंचाई दी जाएगी। प्लान बनाने के बाद मैं यहाँ पहुँचे। देख रहे हैं आप, ऊपर वाला जो डिवाइस है वो रिसीवर है। हम ट्राइबल हॉस्पिटल से इंटरनेट वहाँ से यहाँ लेते हैं, और यहाँ लेने के बाद में इसको हम एक राउटर कॉन्फ़िगर करके, राउटर से पूरा एरिया वाईफाई करके उसमें से एक इथरनेट पोर्ट में से इंटरनेट दोबारा से इस डिवाइस के थ्रू हम दूसरी जगह भेज रहे हैं, जो कि कृष्णा हाउस पे है। तो ये हमारा रिसीवर और ट्रांसफर पॉइंट, दोनों पॉइंट, और ये पूरा एरिया वाइफ हो गया। इससे पहले यहाँ कोई इंटरनेट के चांसेस नहीं थे, यहाँ कोई इंटरनेट इस्तेमाल नहीं कर पाता था।
It's nice, very nice. That in fact, the day it was checked first and it is working now, it was like a celebration. Mentally, we didn't do anything, but it is really a nice feeling to have the connectivity.